So I'm going to give a short talk on a compositional subject more than a musicological one. And I'm hoping it'll be interesting for people coming from all different directions of microtonal theory, just in the way I'm approaching and trying to understand temperament and just intonation and spectral phenomena kind of all together. So I'm going to talk about a particular 7-note microtonal scale, but I think a lot of this is generalizable one way or another to other kinds of work. So this is an attempt to think a little bit about temperament, about what I'm calling hybridity, the way that we draw on different modes of pitch organization at different times, and about approximation. I think what's interesting to me about hybridity is that it's a part of a lot of our musical practices already, especially tonality and jazz improvisation, things like that, where we have aspects which are very harmonically based. That's where we get our perfect fifths, our consonances and dissonances, our chord roots, and so on. But we also have a side of these musics, whether it's Liszt or John Coltrane, which lets us move in equal tempered thinking. If Coltrane moves through major thirds to come back to where he started, those are equal tempered thirds in some fundamental way. So I want to think about that relationship between temperament and J.I. So I'm making no claims to having invented this scale, and in fact, as I started going through this, I realized there's versions of it in lots of theorists' writings. Georgy Rimsky-Korsakov, Nikolai's son, was doing something with this in the 1920s. Don Ellis, the trumpet player, wrote about it in the 1960s. So it's an interesting scale with some interesting properties. And I'm first just going to play this little page of things here in just intonation. I'll explain the intervals in a moment, but I thought it would be interesting to hear it both as a scale over a putative fundamental, but also in triads and fourth chords. Here's the scale with the ratios I think fit most naturally with it. There's other ways to apply ratios to basically the same quarter tone structure. This is one I like a lot. And in a moment I'll show you kind of a derivation of this. There's a great old recording of Lou Harrison showing the derivation of his tuning for the piece Cinna. Some of you might know this, where he kind of walks through the steps of tuning it. I'll play that in a moment. I thought I'd say something about my aims for working with quarter tones here. I feel like at this conference, quarter tones are kind of a very blunt instrument, actually, compared to some of the very refined things in just intonation we've looked at. A lot of the projects I'm looking at, though, involve working with acoustic instruments. I'm working on a saxophone quartet, for example. I'm, like Daniel, I'm waiting for an instrument to arrive, which is a quarter tone trumpet. So there's lots of reasons to be playing with these kind of approximate but very robust intervals. It's easy to notate, it's easy to explain, and a lot of players are comfortable with quarter tones now. I was looking for a way to deal with quarter tones that was harmonic in the technical sense of the word that James Tenney uses. And James Tenney says, sometimes we hear pitch and we don't really hear harmony. We don't hear it in a harmonic way. If we hear harmony, we're thinking about things like interval ratios, about roots, and things like that. If we hear a lot of atonal music, often we're not really hearing harmonically, I would argue. We're hearing other kinds of patterns and structures, totally valid, totally interesting, but not necessarily a harmonic hearing. And finally, I was interested in a kind of tonality, and you'll see as I go through this that I'm looking for something akin to a kind of key, something that can modulate, something that can have different pitch centers, and also support kind of a hierarchy between a tonic, pitches in a scale, and pitches outside the scale, so building that kind of thing. I wanted to work with just intervals, and this really drove me into the 11s and 13s. So one thing I've skipped over here, you could call it a 13-limit tuning, but with all the 5s and 7s kind of scooped out. So it's kind of the edges of a 13-limit tuning. The 5s and 7s don't work well as quarter tones. We know this, I think, all of us. And I was actually intrigued. I felt by leaving the 5s and 7s out, this kind of developed its own sound world in a way. We don't have the 5s and 7s, we just have the 11s, 13s, and 3s. And I was inspired a bit by Lamont Young's well-tuned piano, which uses 3s and 7s and skips 5s. And I think by skipping 5s, in a way it makes the 7 relationships easier to hear. I think something like that might be happening here. So I'm going to play this thing that basically walks through these 5 steps. I'll kind of point along. Can I do this? Yeah, I'll try to do a little bouncing ball thing as I go, if I can get my... Okay. Sorry, I can't get my keyboard over there. I'll stand up and point to them. That's that. Ways of thinking about this scale. I'm going to show you a few lattice representations after Ben Johnston. And my thought here is that we're basically trying to find ratios for something conceived in 24 EDO, but to make it work in just intonation. It's quite closely related to the diatonic scale. As you can see, it's a 7-note scale. Instead of alternating whole steps and half steps, we have alternating whole tones and 3/4 tones in a kind of similar arrangement. And it's actually based on a series of half-fifths. If you think of the major scale, it's generated by fifths, F, C, G, D, A, E, B. This is generated by half-fifths, A quarter flat, C, E quarter flat, G, B quarter flat, D, F quarter sharp. This is the way I like to think of it, with a kind of spine of fifths, C, G, D, going up to the 11th, and then down a fifth, going up to the 13th, and up a fifth. So everything except that 11/6 is an overtone of the C, which feels kind of like a tonic. There's an interesting historical example of this. Don Ellis invents a lot of quarter tone scales based on tetrachords. So he builds quarter tone tetrachords and then combines them. This is his type 2/2, happens to be this one. And he thinks of it all as 11s. So if this is a 3-dimensional lattice, 11, 13, and 3. This is just a 2-dimensional lattice of 3s and 11s. I think he ends up adding, I think he felt strange about having this A-flat all on its own all over there, with the other fifths so far away. So he kind of wraps around this A-flat at 44/27. He represents more accurately, I guess, down here as an 18/11. So this is showing up in 1967, I want to say. I think that's the publication of that book. I'm not going to go deeply into this, but I just want to kind of put out that we're thinking about different ways of comprehending or perceiving a pretty similar phenomenon, whether I conceive of it like this or we conceive of it like Ellis does. I think a lot of this has to do with context. I think we could actually make a context where we really hear the 11 ratios, where we get the sense that there are 2 layers, the layer of CGD, the 11 ratios and their fifths. I think we could invent a musical context where we hear that A quarter flat as the 44/27 in the upper left, if we really emphasize those relationships. Similarly, if we want to hear the 13s, if we want to hear this setup, this analysis essentially, we'd have to emphasize the difference somehow between the 11s and the 13s. I'm going to play the different tunings just to hear them, my tuning, Ellis's, and just a 24 EDO one here. The differences are there, but they're pretty subtle. And I feel like they kind of fall within what, if you ask an acoustic ensemble to play with this, there would be this difference. And for me, I'm often thinking about 10 cents error as an acceptable rendition of these things, as I think we have to in a lot of performance music, in 12-tone equal temperament even. I had a few reservations in my first experiments with this. It felt like it might be a little too close to diatonic scale, a little too tonal in that sense. I wanted some kind of tonality, but it seemed like it was getting right back into diatonicism somehow. And I also felt like it had this potential kind of modal makam style thing. And there are some makam modes which are whole tone, three-quarter tone, three-quarter tone. So I wanted to kind of be careful that I wasn't writing some kind of exoticizing sort of fake Arabic or fake Persian music. So that was something kind of running through the back of my head. I ultimately started to feel good, though, about having this kind of very basic scale at the center of the system that could express a tonality really clearly, and then being able to add to this with various kinds of microtonal extensions. So if you wanted to add a seventh partial of that C, you can. You can add whatever you want, but this would be the kind of basis of it. The difference between diatonic music and chromatic music, basically. So there's a nice parallel, and this is getting into the 24 EDO thinking. I mentioned you could imagine this as kind of akin to a major scale. Think of a major scale as a 7-note slice of the circle of fifths, or cycle of fifths. So this is showing with the bar the pitches that are involved there, and then the scale that comes out of that. And just like in the major scale, how if you take the 7th degree and flatten it, it becomes the 4th degree of a new scale, going from C major to F major. You can do something like that. So if I take the F quarter sharp, and I turn it into an F natural, all of a sudden we have the same scale, starting now in A quarter flat rather than C. I can do that again and come down to F. And you could do all this in reverse, right, and climb back up. It's really just like add a sharp, take away a sharp, but in this case we're adding a quarter sharp or quarter flat. I'm going to play that with the circle of thirds, the circle of neutral thirds, I should specify, and the scales. And the scale inversion. It's a moment of symmetry scale if you're in sort of Irv Wilson territory. A lot of microtonal theory has been written about that aspect. So I was really delighted to find this article by the musicologist Lydia Adler about Georgy Rimsky-Korsakov, who wasn't someone I knew anything about before, but in some of these avant-garde circles, mostly around St. Petersburg, I believe, there's this little group of Russian composers of that generation, and he had the scale which he called the Ionio-Phrygian. I love these names, the Ionio-Phrygian. I didn't know that much about how his actual modal system works. I think it's all in Russian now, and I can't read Russian. I don't have access to that. But I speculated a little bit that if you have an Ionio-Phrygian scale, surely you must have a Dorian-Lydian scale, and so on. And the idea there, I think, behind the names is that if you take all the quarter flats and quarter sharps, and you round them downwards into 12-tone equal temperament, that's a Phrygian scale, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat, F. If you round them all up, you get a Ionian scale. So it's kind of in between those two. I really like this idea. It turns out that Rimsky-Korsakov has his own idea about all these names, so these are actually my speculation, but it sort of made sense with the idea of modes. I'm going to show you a little bit of an improvisation in another one. I've been talking about what would logically be the Lydio-Aeolian, so part Lydian, part Aeolian, and just to show the possibility for these sort of modal rotations, I also want to play this little improvisation in the Phrygiomixolydian, which would be this one up here. So I meant to highlight this one, I don't think I did, but this is like a 40 seconds of this mode of the scale. And this is in 24 EDO, not any just intonation, basically because moving the center would mean that all the ratios have to move around. So this is equal temperament. Moving on to some resources that come a little bit more from spectral music thinking. I got very interested in summation tones. I've been interested in this for a while. I learned about this first from Ezra Sims, who has an interesting article where he says that to him these summation tone groupings, when you have, think of the numbers here as representing overtones, basically, right? So the whole tone at 8 to 9 can add to 17. He said he found that these seemed really stable to him. He thought they had a kind of lowest energy state, like a point of stability. They were easier to tune, he said. He thought they were easier to sing. I kind of agree with him. I don't have any way of testing this. I feel like it needs a little psychological experiment, but his idea was that somehow the reinforcement of some indifference tones made these particularly interesting. I'm going to play you this page. It's not the prettiest example, but the tunings are all just at least. And you'll get a sense of what that sound is of frequency addition. It's a little bit like ring modulation in Stockhausen or something like that. One way of sort of estimating it is that the generated pitch, the sum, is an octave higher above the midpoint. It's like you're taking the midpoint, which would be the average, and then multiplying it by 2, which gives you the sum of A plus 1. This is a really interesting thing you can do with those, to make chains of combination tones, chains of sums. And both Zender and Claude Vivier, who's a big compositional hero in Montreal, do things like this, where they add these up. The first line, if you look at it, is a Fibonacci sequence. And what's interesting with all these is that no matter where you start, if you start with 1 and 2, or 1 and 4, or 2 and 9, they always converge to the same interval, which is actually the interval of phi, of the golden ratio. So they end up being about 8 1/3 semitones. And that's just what you get if you repeat this time and time again. Here's what these sound like. And the second one. These are quite interesting chordal structures. They're very consonant sounding to my ear, and as you get high up, you get this kind of, I think of it as a very neutral quality of this 8.33 semitone interval that you're approximating closer and closer. And I chose to cut off here basically at a point where it seemed not very practical to go on to 97, for example. I felt 37, 60 I'm comfortable with. Above that, I'm a little bit less so. So practically speaking, I've been doing a lot of this with 2 MIDI controllers. So I have them sit like 2 full-size keyboards, set up kind of like a double manual organ or double manual harpsichord, which has been really, really promising and I think really, really enjoyable to play with. And these are the intervals I set up those 2 keyboards with. So you can do this all in 24 EDO, of course, too. Then you just have 2 12 EDO keyboards, a quarter tone apart. But the more refined version would assign, for example, 0 to C. and then the other intervals fall in from there. I have all my scale intervals, but I also have pretty much all the odd harmonics up to 39, so those are possible to add to this. I have some other useful ratios like 4 to 3 in there as well. 51 and 57 sound really obscure, but they're just 3 times 17 and 19. So everything has some possible reinforcement through perfect fifths. And I do want to play a little example of this as well. So this is all running through Pianotech, the piano plugin. So the retuning is very quick and very easy with that, I've found. I'm going to play you a little improvisation in C, in just intonation, with a lot of these extensions and with some summation tones as well as part of the structure. To take this kind of spectrality a little bit further, I'll talk a little bit about the saxophone quartet project just to finish up, and I have a couple examples from that. I've been working with Quasar, which is our great saxophone quartet in Montreal, and they put together this big database of their saxophone multiphonics called Qphonics. So I was working on this and did a lot of acoustical analyses of my own, and this thing I talked about with summation tones is actually a big principle in how sax multiphonics work. Very many of them will have 2 frequencies, those frequencies at an octave, the sum of those 2 frequencies, then sometimes sums of sums. You can see that pretty well here, I think. Like the F sharp to G sharp is 4 and 9. Something about 4 and 9 of the F sharp overtone series. They add together and give you a 17. Actually, I think a typo in the score here. This should be a D plus, a quarter tone. 4 plus 13 then, this plus this gives you 17, the G natural. 8 plus 13, the F sharp above that, plus this gives you 22. So everything chains together in this way. And I found that made it a very nice, a very natural fit with this kind of scale. So these were pretty carefully selected from about 200 multiphonics, and I analyzed them all for their letter name, their sense deviation, an octave, and their frequency. And the color code here is just saying, well, which of these is reasonably close to either 12 EDO, that's the green, or 24 EDO, that's the yellow. So this one is great for that kind of purpose because everything is a quarter tone, basically. And the bold text over here are just the loudest of those partials. So I'll play a little bit like a 50-second, 40-second improvisation on these. There's a collage of these 3 multiphonics in the background, and then I'm playing on the F sharp scale over that, just to try to fit some of these piano melodies into the saxophone sound. some little intonation errors there, but you can still kind of foreshadow things that are coming up or echo things that are in the chord, which I really like being able to do. I'm going to do one more example like that, and then I have a quick couple words to wrap up. This is a C spectrum. So here I was able to use the just intonation C scale, very much the same idea on 5 of these multiphonics this time. Some of them are pretty far removed from C, in fact. Like this one is pushing up towards the 9th harmonic of C, the 39th harmonic of C, which is part of that scale, it's the neutral third, the 51st. Others, like this one, are much closer to home, with like 8s and 9s and things. So, in conclusion, I'll just comment quickly on the approach of this project, which has really emphasized the idea of combining really different modes of microtonal and musical thinking with all of their kind of attendant possibilities and limitations and assumptions into something kind of like a hybrid. So it's not just intonation, it's not equal temperament, but it's drawing on both of those. I think this is a really fruitful approach. It's not really a purist approach because it's mixing left and right, but it allows you to take advantage of just intonation when you want to have a really beautiful, really pure, really tunable interval. It allows you to have these kinds of symmetrical transposition paths and modulations of temperament, and at the same time to interact with these found objects, basically. These are terribly untempered and not really just intonation either, so you can interact with these things too, taking into account a certain degree of tolerance, a certain degree of flexibility. So this is what I'm interested in working more on. It's pushing the idea of openness, I think. I like this idea of systems which have room for different modes of thought rather than being really kind of axiomatic or really based on one principle. So thanks for letting me give you this little report on that, and thanks very much.
So, Lydia in person?
I've never met Lydia. I'm very interested in her work. I discovered it and was amazed because that scale is right there, and I hadn't known about it.
Yes. I knew this article by chance. I don't spend too much time on microtonality, but by chance I knew this one. I sent some pictures and regards. Probably you've been in touch with her, right?
I haven't yet. This is all very recent.
Okay. So I was assuming she would know who you are from the picture.
Okay.
Yeah. She will ask me.
Okay. So I'm looking forward to exploring that a bit more. And I don't know if that music exists or if that's been archived or performed or anything. Rimsky-Korsakov's quarter tone music. It would be fascinating.
I should know. I'm sure I read it at some point, but I forget so many things.
I feel like that would be a really interesting project to get into. What's going on there?
Jim's getting that citation for me.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm very interested in this too. There's so many instruments that quarter tones work more easily, even though my sensibilities lie with equal temperament. With just intonation rather than equal temperaments. So we can talk sometime, but I have a quarter tone scordatura for ukulele that I've been working with now for a couple of people that want concert ukulele pieces.
I feel like most microtonalists feel that quarter tone music tends to sound bad. This is what I usually say. It has a lot of out of tune intervals. It doesn't fit the overtone series very well. I really try to avoid, for example, approximating the 7th harmonic as a quarter tone, which a lot of people do.
And
I think it doesn't work. A lot of us have thought about that. James Penny told me it didn't work. I was trying to show him things once. He said, it doesn't work. You can't approximate that with a quarter tone. It won't sound like a seventh. So.
And major third is nowhere near.
Right.
For us too. Yeah.
Alina?
So the question is following. What is the difference between Q-phonic and multiphonic? Is there any?
Oh, sorry. Q-phonic is just the name of their database. So
okay.
they're called Quasar. They did this big project. It's qphonics.com or something like that. So no, it's just their list of multiphonics. Yeah, q-phonics.com.
You know Marcus Weiss's book, right?
I do, yes.
He has many, and he has another notation system.
Okay.
So, but with standard deviation, and I think it would be take a very good look on that. The most important thing, and I wanted to know your approach as a composer, is following, because I'm also composing a lot for saxophone because I have a lot of friends. Is that unfortunately for some of the wind instruments like the saxophone, especially the double reed, which is not the case, it's very dependent on the context that you put them, if they're gonna work or not.
Yeah.
So in the theoretical kind of representation, I completely understand your work, and it's very interesting, but where you place them in music can be a little bit risky. Did you think of that?
Yeah, I've been learning more about this, basically. So I led a student project at McGill where I teach, where 4 composers were working with the quartet. We had workshops. I like their list, actually, which is a lot smaller than Weiss's list, but they said it's the ones they feel really comfortable with. So they didn't leave out things that they thought they might not get regularly, or that they'd have to have a brand new reed to play. So it's kind of a nice short list of things they're confident with. And then the biggest challenge I found was that the dynamics are a huge thing. You have to know, that only works fortissimo, and I was trying to put it in a nice pianissimo passage. It just isn't possible sometimes to do that kind of thing. So that was a real revelation that that's kind of that they're really like these found objects. They can be one way. They have a lot of limitations on their flexibility with dynamics. They don't have a lot of flexibility with retunings. They kind of are just that. But this felt pretty robust. And since we were working with that particular quartet, we were also helping them to kind of test drive their database, I guess, and build a lot of pieces that have these.
Just in case you are interested, of course it's a completely different perception, but it has very stable result. Do you know Ellen Fellowfield? She's a cellist. She did a website that is called The Cello Map.
Oh, I know
where
that.
she dedicates a super huge width example, and she describes how it is produced normally on a string instrument. What are the results that you get, because most of the times you have the addition and the subtraction. Some of them are very clear to the 11th, which is the one that you want to use. And the good thing about string instruments is that if you place your finger in the right position, of course it's depending on other things like bow pressure, but because you have a string and not a tube with keys, they are always stable, at least in the intonation, and you can play with different dynamics and things like that. Of course, there is also a problem that they don't all sound as clear, but for that you have 2 possibilities. You have the mirrored positions, so you can produce the same
different harmonic nodes to
you can have the same harmonic notes, but from different positions and different colors. And I think that maybe only for kind of a theoretical, consideration, just take a look. I think
that sounds very appealing. Yeah, because it would fit right into this kind of logic of sums and differences, which I think I found is a really useful thing in writing microtonal music for a while, and I feel like it makes it easier to hear the whole structure. Those triads feel really solid to me in a way that dyads often don't. And the third note kind of confirms the other 2, if that makes sense. It's checks the other 2. So there's a nice way of getting a little bit of a sense of this is really intended, this is really the pitch I'm looking for. It's not a out of tune major third. which is my worry with this scale sometimes. Is it going to sound like a really out-of-tune diatonic scale, or does it have its own flavor where that neutral third is correct, like very clearly correct?
Yeah, it is the physicality, although I'm not a string player, but I try to play them all, that if you place it in a position that is very close into harmonics, then the instrument cannot decide which. So you have all of them, the previews, the sounding together, which is why you cannot produce, for example, any multiphonics in the middle of the instrument, because all the area is drawn to the second.
Oh, yeah.
This is the position that always the dominant kind of wins, and then if you put it in between the 11th and the 13th, then you have the 11th, 13th, and the 24th. And
James Tenney says a thing about this too, and he talks about how the really powerful intervals, what parts called powerful intervals, do kind of have this area around them, which is like I'm thinking about gravitational thing, like everything around a fifth. It's really hard to have something that's almost a fifth sound reasonable, because it all sounds like a fifth at that point. Yes. Same for an octave. And so, I think one thing I've enjoyed here is really using the fifth. I'm using the fifth more than I thought I would be, honestly. But using that to kind of confirm these more exotic and more distant intervals. So that's sort of how it feels. The fifth is giving some stability to those. The other ones are giving the color. And so between the two, you get a combination of those. Yeah, thanks. I'm going to check out the cello map. I haven't thought of that.
Any more questions? I don't know how. I think it's 4 already. We started a little bit late. Any more questions? Okay, thank you so much, Robert.
And this topic actually is divided into 2 parts, the research and practice. And the main goal of the study was to compare Lithuanian folk scales with historical tuning systems in order to determine which tuning or temperament characteristic to those scales. In the 5 researches I have conducted so far, including the study of microtones and natural intervals in folk music scales, I was looking for characteristic models of interval structures in scales composed of different sets of tones in vocal and instrumental music. As a result, in a number of folk songs, I have found tones that refer to the microtones, or to natural intervals, or to the tuning of just intonation, which can reach up to 11th harmonic. The goal of this recent study was to determine which tuning system is closest to the tuning of each song, and to set up a tuning that is common of all the songs. Now I will play an example of multi-part song, a supertina called The Cat, Lithuanian Kati, performed by Wooden Trumpet Ensemble, and this recording was made before the Second World War in 1935, so you can hear the sound, how it sounded like 100 years ago. So the recording comes from the north of Lithuania, and these original songs, they comes also from that area. It was hypothesized that European tuning systems of the 16th to 20th centuries, mean-tone and regular temperaments influenced Lithuanian folk music, and its tuning system through the spread of Christian music, especially organ music, which came to Lithuania from Italy and Germany. And on the other hand, perhaps the Lithuanian folk music interaction was influenced by the music of non-Christian cultures, of Karaims, Crimean Tatars and Jews, who have lived in Lithuania since Middle Ages. The Lithuanian folklore scales of the first half of the 20th century have been selected for comparison, as they are likely to have preserved the earlier tunings both in Lithuania and in the United States. It can be argued that the recordings made in America may reveal other musical connections and influences acquired by Lithuanians living here. The research material was collected from the archives of the Institute of Lithuanian Literature and Folklore, the Smithsonian Institute Folkways Collection, and the Scheller Collection from the Lithuanian Culture Museum in Chicago, the Lithuanian Research Center in Lemont. The question was raised whether the music of non-Christian communities in Lithuania could have influenced Lithuanian folk music, which meant adding to the research Karaim, Khmer and Tatar and Jewish folk music scales. In this case, I have contacted Karaim community living near Vilnius in the town of Trakai, but unfortunately there were only 2 or 3 surviving audio recordings, mainly religious music, ceremonial songs, for example, the wedding song, and the same situation was known for the music of Khmer and Tatars. As to the folk music of Lithuanian Jews before 1940, most of the recordings were dominated by religious or klezmer music, and there are no surviving songs or recordings of other genres of Jewish folk in Lithuania. So I took the material for the study of Lithuanian folk songs primarily for my dissertation. In addition, I made a study of American Lithuanian folk scales in the computer program Melodyne, determining interval distances in order to compare them with 13 historical temperament systems: the medieval Pythagorean, 5 mean-tone temperaments, 4 irregular temperaments, the Arabic Alpha-Arabic scale, as well as the scale of natural harmonic series and the 12-tone equal temperament. For quicker comparison of 118 songs before the start of the research, I contacted a mathematician at Kaunas University of Technology to find a method developed to research formula that was used after this in the statistical analysis software R to conduct a comparative study. The research method was chosen, but before I thought of using the digital intelligence, but the scientists suggested a simpler and practical way. But it's also possible to do this research with a digital technology. On the top of this page, you see the formula. In the brackets, letter S marks a song, then SI marks a song number, first, second, and etc. SJ marks pitch number of a selected song in the scale, and NI number of pitches used in that song. Let's take Sij, where I equals 1, and J equals 1, and I denote the pitch in cents, hundredths of semitone, of a J pitch of a type song. Here n equals 118 is the number of songs analyzed, and Ni is the number of pitches used in the I song, which vary between 3 and 7 in the different songs. In the table on the right, here you can see the first 4 songs. In the next line, similarly with the temperaments. If you look to the table temperaments, you can see that F marks the temperament, then Fk marks the number of the temperament, first, second, etc. FL pitch number in the scale of a selected temperament, and Mk number of pitches used in the temperament. Let's take a letter FKL where K equals 1 and L equals 1. Mk denotes the pitch in cents, hundredths of semitone of a elf pitch of a cave temperament. Here M equals 13 is the number of temperaments used in analysis, and Mk is the number of pitches used in the cave temperament, which is usually equal to 12. But can take other values, for example, equal to 14 pitches in an Arabic scale. Since the pitches of both the songs and the temperaments are expressed in cents, their similarity can be defined as the modulus of a difference. When searching for an equivalent of the distance of a pitch Sij of a song in the temperament of K, the pitch with a minimum or equal distance calculated in cents. In this way, the distance between the pitch in the scale and its equivalent in the temperament, the deviation of a note, is defined by the formula. If you look to the formula on the top of the screen, D marks distance, Ci song number, Sj pitch number, and K temperament number, equals minimum L equals 1 pitch number and K number of pitches. Now, for example, we take the distance number of a fourth song with pitch number 2. This is the last one. you see S4.1 song in the table, and S4.2 second pitch in the scale equals 142 cents. We calculate the spatial distance numbers, for instance, of Pythagorean temperament K1 from a list. We can see in the table that Pythagorean is number 1 from the top down. Now you can see the subtraction formula and the results. One pitch from a song is compared to all pitches of a selected temperament. Subtracting the tone distances of a selected temperament from a single tone distance of a song gives the result. Then we take the smallest possible number, which is 52 cents. Sij minus FKL equals 52 cents is the minimum distance of an interval in the song to compare with the interval distance in the tuning scale. Then, in this way, we calculate every next pitch of a song with the pitch distances of a temperament. For example, the minimum interval distance of the song S4 pitch 3 and temperament K1 equals to 51 cents. Then the distance between the pitches of a song and the temperament is defined as the average distance between the pitches of a song in the scale and the pitches of a selected temperament. In this slide we can see the results of a previous calculation of a song. Now adding each pitch, we can see how close the scale of a song is to the Pythagorean tuning. The result is 33 cents. Then we have to calculate the distances of the same song with the next 12 temperaments. The value k, for which the distance dik for the ith song, the smallest, indicates the temperament of the song. The differences in the pitch distances between the determined temperaments are analyzed for different groups of songs. Let me show you a sample calculation for the song compared to 12th tet. The recording is from the Smithsonian Folk-Music Discography collection. The song has four notes with frequencies expressed in cents. In this case, the 12th tet temperament is defined by 13 pitches, including tonic or the interval of an octave. Let's start with calculation of the distance between the first note of the song equals to 0 cents and every note of 12th tet. The result is trivial in this case, but we can provide a detailed calculation. So trivially song's first note of 0 cents is the most similar to the tuning first note of 0 cents, the distance of 0. Let's calculate the distance between the second note of the song equal to 200 cents and every note of 12th tet. Song's note of 200 cents is the most similar to the third note of 200 cents, with a distance of 0. Let's calculate the distance between the third note of the song equal to 394 cents and every note of 12th tet. Song's note of 394 cents is the most similar to the fifth tuning note of 400 cents, with a distance of 6. Finally, let's repeat calculation of the last note of the song equal to 467 cents. Song's note of 467 cents is the most similar to the fifth tuning note of 500 cents, with a distance of 33. Now we have obtained the distances for the notes of the song, 0, 0, 6, and 33. The average of these errors is the distance between the song and 12-tone equal temperament, equals to 9.75 cents. If we do calculation to the natural tuning, I will provide short description of calculation by skipping a detailed calculation of every note of the song to every note of the tuning. The 0 cents song note is the most similar to 0 cents note of the tuning, and the distance is 0 minus 0 equals 0. The 200 cents song note is the most similar to 204 cents note of the tuning, and the distance is 4. The 394 cents song note is the most similar to 386 cents note of the tuning, and the distance is 8. And the last, the 467 cents song note is the most similar to 471 cents note of tuning, and the distance is 4. When we add up all the results and divide them by 4, the distance between the song and the natural tuning is 4 cents. It can be seen that the notes of the song correspond better to the natural tuning with an average distance of 4 than to the 12-step tuning with an average distance of 9.75.
Sorry, can I ask you something?
Yes.
Why is the third tone D sharp?
Say again?
Why is in the scale the third tone D sharp? I don't understand that.
I didn't catch.
A, B, then it's D sharp.
This is a scale.
Okay, but why is the D sharp?
I'm
really sorry. It's.
I didn't put an alteration kind of microtonal.
No.
But it's it was okay. The meltdown program. It was scale starts from A, C, after is D sharp and D.
A.
Should it be a C
Oh,
sharp?
right.
Is
It's
that-
a mistake. Yeah.
okay.
So
Okay.
D sharp.
C sharp D.
Yeah.
C sharp D.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So. The shortest distance, for example, the best tuning match to the song is to the previously calculated natural tuning, which is 4 cents. So we can assume that the natural tuning was used in this song. The Richard's formula was first used to compare the interval distances of all 118 songs to the 13 temperament systems. This table summarizes all the research material and shows the closest temperament or tuning for each song scale. For example, a selected row shows a song, the closest distance for each temperament and the result. This was followed by separate studies of the vocal, instrumental, and Lithuanian American song groups, and then more detailed studies of the sutartinės, monody, wooden trumpet, panpipes, cantlers, shell collection, and Smithsonian song groups. All this material was compared first to 13 temperaments, then 12 temperaments without Arabic tuning, to 6 temperaments for well-temperate plus natural and 12 tet, then to 4 well temperaments, and finally to natural tunings and 12 tet. A comparison of all songs, the 13 temperament systems, shows that there are 3 tunings that correspond to the most examples. Natural, Arabic for 30 songs each, and 1.3 comma, 16th century temperament for 25 examples. However, if we exclude the Arabic tuning, the second graph to the right, which has a large number of natural intervals, we see in the next table that the number of songs corresponding to the natural and 1.3 comma tunings increases to well over 30 songs. Excluding the comma, Arabic and Pythagorean tunings, and compare the 18 and 19 well temperaments plus the natural and 12 tet temperaments, we see that the natural tuning has the most examples, over 50. But the Werkmeister free temperament appears in 25 examples. Comparing only the well-tempered tunings, the Werkmeister 18th century temperament has the largest number of examples with over 50, followed by the Nachart and Volotin 18th century tunings with 30 and all the 30 songs respectively. Finally, if we compare all 118 songs with natural tuning and 12 tet, we can see that the natural tunings has over 70 examples and 12 tet has over 40 examples. If we look at the separate group of vocal music, as the previous comparison of all songs, we can identify 3 tunings, natural, Arabic, and 1.3 comma. But in instrumental music, we see that the 1.3 comma temperament and the natural tuning are dominant. For this graph, we can see that the separate song group of sutartinės, monody, wooden trumpet, panpipes that have the same tuning tendencies as the previous example groups, the natural, Arabic, and 1.3 comma tunings. However, it should be noted that the tuning of a complex instrument is closer to the Pythagorean tuning than to the natural tuning seen in the last graph. Now I will play an excerpt of a melody stood up in the garden, performed by this instrument. This table summarizes all the results of the research. The colors indicate the most common tunings and temperaments found in the scales. The yellow color marks the natural tuning, red for the 12th tet, green for the 1-point comma, 3, violet for the Arabic scale, blue for the Pythagorean scale. Thus, with the initial comparison of 13 temperaments, the songs clearly showed the interval similarities of the songs with the natural tuning and the Arabic scale. But after the Arabic scale was excluded, its intervals fell into the natural tuning and the 1.3 temperament because of the number of natural intervals. Then, after rejecting Pythagorean because of the small number of songs and the questionable influence of the Middle Ages on Lithuanian scales, a well-tempered tuning was chosen for the 18th and 19th centuries that should be closer to the early 20th century recordings, along with natural and 12th tet. However, the natural tuning has the largest number of samples. In the study of well-tempered tunings that may have influenced the scales of Lithuanian songs, thus Werkmeister free temperament, but when compared to the natural harmonic series and the equal temperament of the 20th century, the natural tuning is the preferred one. It can be concluded that there are many cases found of natural intervals in Lithuanian folk songs, considering that the temperaments of previous centuries had some naturally tuned intervals. Now we look at a group of American immigrant songs. I was wondering what kind of tuning these songs might belong to. These Lithuanian American song samples were selected from the 1910 to 1929 Shell collection and the 1955 Smithsonian Folklist collection, and compared with the samples of Lithuanian singers recorded from 1935 to 1938. It is not coincidence that the Lithuanian American interval distances are placed in separate group, suggesting that since the 12th tet influence was already prevalent on the American continent at that time, it may have influenced the tuning of Lithuanian folk songs. And I wonder if the tunings of immigrant songs may have differed from those of Lithuanian performers. From the first table, we can see that if we compare all the Sherlock Smithsonian collections, the 12th tet temperament has a slight advantage. But if we compare the recordings of the two collections separately, we can see that the Sherlock collection is dominated by the 12th tet temperament, while the Smithsonian collection is dominated by the natural, Arabic, and 1.3 comma temperaments. But let's take a single song that was recorded by singers in Lithuania and immigrants in the United States. In the example above, we can see the interval distances in yellow of a monody recorded in the United States. The tuning gradually narrowing to equal temperament, but still maintains almost the exact interval of the diminished fifth, 471 cents, with the second degree equal temperate at 200 cents and the third degree approaching to 400 cents. Looking at the intervals of the three recordings of a single song and the dates of the recordings in Lithuania and the USA, we can observe a gradual approach to the 12th tone equal temperament. For example, the interval of the second recorded in 1936 in Lithuania is 191 cents and recorded in 1958, 187 cents is almost the same. But from the recording in the US, it is 200 cents, recorded in 1949. The interval of a third recorded in 1936 in Lithuania, 350 cents, and recorded in 1958, 367 cents, only slightly changes. Far enough from a third of 400 cents of equal tuning, but in the US, the third is 394 cents, is already approaching 1210. For example, we can clearly observe the migration of a third interval from the 350 cents in Lithuania to 394 cents in America. Now we can listen to a short excerpt of the intonation of this song in Lithuania and the United States.
That's interesting.
In conclusion, this study shows that no single temperament or tuning was found in all of the examples vocal and instrumental music. But 4 tunings have been detected. The natural tuning, partly the Arabic scale with the lowered second or third degree, the 1.3 comma temperament, and the Pythagorean tuning in the music of a country's instrument, as far as historical tunings are concerned. From previous studies, a sequence of natural intervals up to 11 harmonics has been identified. So I have the idea of comparing vocal and instrumental music with a 22 EDO system, which may be close to these 4 music scales. Thank you.
Well, how many years have you been involved with these projects? It's already 5, 6, 7?
Yeah, I actually talked to Robert. I got his dissertation at Harvard University, and it influenced me to look at the intervals and his approach to the intervals.
Mm-hmm.
So my idea maybe was many years ago. I was interested about the scales, but what to do with the scales I didn't know. So I started from this approach to the intervals and then I went to the scales. And actually it happened at the same time, but it's a number of songs and you can do along. So it was fantastic that we found the program Melodyne. It was released recently, I think. So the Melodyne can do that. So I spent a lot of time, but not a lot.
Yeah. 118 songs.
118, yes.
And
because I picked, of course it was 200 maybe, but I picked up from listening, hearing, because you can hear the microtones, and some interesting intonations. So it was, exactly.
And I guess you're going to be involved with this project. I mean, you're in Kaunas, and you will be working on this in a few years. From now, do you have any thoughts on do you imagine why these different systems, or how it could be?
I think it's a non-professional performance, of course, and singers.
Yeah, but something must have, the differences must come from somewhere. We understand in a logical way.
Yeah.
This is. I don't know if I'm explaining myself. Okay. For example, I was comparing these to flamenco traditions. There's also some microtones.
Yeah.
It can vary from a school or a family. They sing some microtones, and then you go, even in the same city, another family, another tradition, it sounds slightly different. And if you go to another city, another family, also a little bit different. Today is getting, because of everything is getting closer, I have the feeling, I haven't been involved with this lately, but I have the feeling it's getting closer. And so maybe it happened something like this, that I could understand why these differences.
Actually, if we take sutartinės or wooden trumpet ensembles, we are based only in the north of Lithuania, and only that tradition comes from the north.
Yes.
But the melody can come from the south, but I found maybe 3 to 5 performers, women performers, who used to lower the second degree or the third degree all the time. But the other thing that, of course, if you look at the books, at textures written in 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, it was a lot of ensembles that played music. But we have only, for example, sutartinės, wooden trumpet ensembles, we have only 18 samples of one ensemble. So I could say about this only from that source. But before it was maybe, I don't know, many of them. But after the Second World War, everything is disappeared. So what left? So what I add that sutartinės and the wooden trumpet ensemble, some samples consist of 4 pitches, so it refers to natural tunings. And there is some samples that goes until 11 chromatic. But yeah, it's not enough. Yes.
Do you think that the recording process affects the tuning as we perceive it as listeners?
Second?
The recording process, if it's a phonograph or a mono, because I think that's, if you have to sing louder, especially to vocal music, or play louder, that to be, recorded, this can have a big effect on the intonation.
Yeah. When I did the research, yes, I didn't think about this. And deviation I put kind of until 15 cents or 35, because there's a lot written. Some non-professional performers will do deviations like a third until 30 cents, 25 cents, and 15 cents. It's even it was a research with professional choirs that singers say that deviation until 15 cents is okay for them. It's not problem in a choir. So I did this kind of difference and compared with until maybe 20, 25, and in the intervals I take these intervals as a normal interval, the deviation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. I remember doing similar distance things to try to figure out where any given set of pitches fits in the overtone series. How close can you get it to overtones?
Yeah.
But your example with the diminished fourth is interesting because the interval that stays the same in all the recordings is like a 21/16. It's very Harry Partch. It's a very kind of Harry Partch interval. And that's interesting that that's the one that's stable. The thirds and the seconds move, but the diminished fourth is like maybe it's really characteristic of that song, or that's what people remember of that song, is that that's the interval that's important. The other ones you can fudge a bit, but that's the big one.
yeah, for me it was interesting because I read a book of my professor, and he was investigating also Lithuanian songs, but in the 70s and 60s, 70s. But it was not the approach of tuning. But he found, and he wrote about what you're talking about, the diminished, the augmented third and diminished fourth, yes? So I found here with the program, it's actually, there is some Sutartina, some songs we sing, they diminished, like this.
It's interesting. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. So I said it's the first part. So the second part, I think, to create some scale from this and to use in my music, in my compositions. To find way, I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really nice.
So there is some commissions for next year. So yeah, Kapchanga and orchestra. So let's see. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Vytautas, what is this picture? I was curious. Is that a wooden trumpet ensemble, or what are those?
Yeah,
that's the thing you played for us. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to squeeze that question in.
Yes.
Looking at
And
And actually, you can, there is not proof, but in the books from the end of 19th century and the beginning of 20th century, some poets they noticed, because they are also practitioners, and they noticed they can blow like 1 until 3 harmonics with these songs.
Cool.
Yeah.
in Vytautas, when you have this scale, are you planning to use this scale for future compositions for particular instruments or voice, or it's open?
It's open.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I was kind of concentrated in this research, so
Of course, yeah.
I have to leave this. And
Yes,
go.
yes. Huge.
Next phase.
So, yeah.
Any more questions? Otherwise, we can move slowly to the last concert by Angel Blanco. He's going to do some interesting compositions for guitar, and he's going to premiere some of his music as well. And I think he's playing Haba, Novaro.
Carrillo.
Yeah, Carrillo, yes, as well. Yes. So take your time, not too long, and we will go slowly. Thank you so much, Vytautas.